to do for the next 20 minutes is really part of addressing a larger question that's come up a couple of times in this conference, which is how do we bring electricity, which is really the oxygen of the modern economy, to the 3.5 billion people on Earth who either have no access or inadequate access. And to do that, we're not going to give you some big framework, though I hope we're going to give you a better sense of where some of the real opportunities are. But we're going to dive deep into a couple of interesting cases. And to give voice to those cases, we have two terrific panelists. To my far right is Kathy Zoe. Kathy's had an interesting multi-dimensional career as, let's see, an investor, academic, head of an NGO, senior government official, and now she is CEO of SunEdison's Frontier Power business. Along with Kathy, we have Pierre-Yves, who is a seasoned veteran of the semiconductor and lighting business, and he spent the last few years at Philips, and now most recently has been named CEO of Lumiled, which is a spinoff from that giant. So Kathy, let me start with you. I'm going to get the quote right. You said recently your goal in this new role is to build the leading global full-service utility in off-grid, underserved areas. Sounds like the right aspiration for this panel. How are you going about that?
Well, I think, thanks, Rick. Great to be here. I think Chad Holliday mentioned yesterday the numbers, right? There's 1.3 billion people in the world have no access to electricity, and then there's another 1.3 billion who are underserved, who have electricity maybe only an hour or two a day. And so SunEdison, being the world's sort of global renewable energy provider that's the biggest, is operating in a lot of places where that's an issue. And so I've been at this for about 3 months, but my colleagues, before I got there, said, you know, we think there's an opportunity there for us to put to work our expertise in infrastructure and providing renewable infrastructure to places that really need it. So we are now building mini-grids, and those mini-grids, we're building them in India, in Tanzania, in Senegal, in Kenya, and though they are solar-powered, they have battery storage, they sometimes have an anchor tenant, which means that a cell phone tower that needs 24/7 power is like sort of the anchor department store, if you will, and then we run a line around the village and provide the villagers with electricity. Sometimes we actually also add water pumping services. We are experimenting with providing connectivity at the same time. So when I say I want to be the full infrastructure provider, it's like I want to be the rural utility that provides those essential services that are really going to be the engine of economic growth and hopefully able to break the cycle of poverty.
Just say a little bit more, if you would, about the business model. So I know it's early days, so it's an evolving business model, but are the anchor tenants sort of covering the cost of this? Do you need to be subsidized? Or where are you in that journey?
Well, in our India operation, the anchor tenants are part of it. I mean, they underwrite a firm part of the investment. So we have a power purchase agreement with the tower companies, and the banks love that because it's a certain revenue. And then what we need to do is we're at risk for the villagers' monthly payments. And what we're doing now is we're learning what sort of packages do they want, how much do they want to pay. So for example, in India, we have what you might think of as basic cable, and that's kind of our cheapest option, which is enough power for one cell phone and one LED light, LEDs. And then the top fanciest sort of equivalent to all 180 channels is enough for multiple light bulbs, a phone charger, a fan, and a TV. And so the various villagers decide to opt into different options, and we're watching those patterns and learning what is a sustainable business model, what sort of offerings do the villagers really want.
Yeah. Well, Pierre-Yves, just following up on that, are these mini grids Kathy's building? Are they going to have LED bulbs then?
Well, I think
how's the developing world part of your strategy?
Well, you know, the most energy efficient way to produce electricity is LED. You know, if I take the comparison for the people who are not too familiar, a 60-watt lamp, you know, traditional incandescent, produces about 800 lumens, units of light. You can do it with 60 watt, you can do it with 15 to 20 watt in fluorescent, or you can do it with 8 watt with LED. So you could see immediately the energy reduction from 60 watt to 8 watt. And this is what I think the developing world needs. It needs more LED lighting because it's the most efficient way to utilize electricity. You require less electricity to light a building, to light a school, to light a stadium for kids to play at night. And many of the poor population in the world have what we call light poverty. There is no light. You know, when the sun goes down, They can't study, so that limits their ability to have an education. They can't play, they can have social function because there is no light, there is no grid. So I think the combination of off-grid or mini-grid with LED lighting is really the solution for the developing world. The question is who pays for it.
That's what I was going to say. Who pays for it? Because you're not selling retail.
No.
In developing.
No. So we're selling to we're a business to business. We sell the LED components to lighting companies who work with you and other solar companies. I think what it requires is forward-looking investment from governments. I know that some governments like China, India, and a few others are putting enormous amount of funding. So China has this big program to provide 770 million LED lamps to China at a subsidized cost, 70 rupee per lamp, just 15 cents for an LED light. And they're going to build also 35 million street lights in the next 5 years. So government of India sees it, government of China see it. In other places, I think the funding is going to be probably a little bit different, and I think you can talk about that.
Yeah, so I mean, but it's interesting that if you don't have an LED lighting system, then the mini grid system overall gets much more expensive. So you think about it, a 3-watt or a 5-watt bulb that allows the children to study at night compared to a 50-watt bulb. I mean, the system has to be sized. You absolutely have to have efficient lighting, efficient fans, efficient television sets with LED screens. I mean, the only way this works really well cost effectively and that the villagers can afford to pay for it is if they've got efficient technologies being deployed.
And are you, in your cable analogy, so are you providing the LED bulbs as part of your bundle, in fact?
Yes. Well, so in India, when we go in, we build the power station that's adjacent to the cell phone towers. We run the mini grid around the village, and that takes about 6 days to build a mini grid. If anybody's ever sort of fussed with getting transmission lines sited in America, it's much faster at a village level in India. And then we need to run the lines into the homes of the people that have subscribed, and we actually then provide the fixture for the LED lamp and the LED lamp itself. So it's for us, it's a package deal. I mean, the folks pay a fee, a monthly fee, they pay us ahead of time for those services.
So what's the big barrier, both of you, let me just start with you, Pierre-Yves. What's the big barrier? The need is clear. We need to get this light to half the population. You've got the technology. What do we need to make it roll out fastest?
Well, we need to continue doing what we're doing in the LED industry. I was talking to you offline. I mean, we are cost reducing LEDs, not price reducing, because price is depending on the market. But we're cost reducing LEDs by 20% a year. We're improving the efficiency by 15% a year. So if today you're buying 100 lumens for $1, tomorrow you'll get 115 lumens for 80 cents. So we're effectively cost reducing the cost of light by 25 to 40% depending on the application. And we need to continue doing that because the developing world cannot afford expensive solutions. So we have to continue to relentlessly driving the cost of LEDs.
You see that falling unit cost? It's the technology's there. It's not like we need some breakthrough to be able to keep.
No, we have a couple of breakthroughs in technology. So we introduced a new technology called chip scale packaging. We're introducing new materials. So a lot of R&D involved in that cost reduction roadmap going forward. But I have a very strong belief that we're going to continue on that trajectory for the next 5 to 10 years. And LED lighting is going to be as cheap as incandescent lighting, just 80% more efficient, you know.
Yeah, just 80%. Kathy, what about you? We mentioned financing. Is financing part of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, just as Pierre-Yves said, we are too reducing costs significantly, right? So and people have mentioned this at this conference. The cost of solar is coming down. So CapEx and OpEx, we're going to drive those down to be able to continuously improve, and that's fantastic. In these early deployments, the unit economics are working because the solar system is actually cheaper than diesel. So the cell phone companies now are having to buy diesel to have 24/7 operations in their towers, and we can beat that even at today's prices, today's costs. And the homes are using kerosene for lighting, and so we can be that too. But even so, we continue to drive down the cost. Now, the financial equation is a combination of equity, debt, and grants. At the moment, there's lots of good public policies where, in India, there's a subsidy for rural electrification. What we model is not unlike what the solar companies who are working in the United States model, which is that those grants are going to go away. So over the next, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, what we're knowing that we have to do is operate over time in a subsidy-free environment. What is very important to us, though, is accessing debt. I mean, SunEdison has become a global leader in part because of project finance. So at the moment, I'm meeting with development banks who, again, have a public policy mission, who are providing concessional debt, or they are willing to wear the risk of villager turnover, and they're providing us with debt for our projects. But again, it's my hope that in several years, when we have a longer operating record of villager behavior in many jurisdictions, that this is something that's going to be bankable in a mainstream way.
You can go to the public markets.
That's right.
Yeah. I'll be thinking about questions. We've got about another 5 or 6 minutes here. I guess I was thinking about, Pierre-Yves, the issue of distributed power versus the grid. We've talked about that a couple of times. I assume you're agnostic as long as they're using LED bulbs. How do you see that playing out in the developing world?
It's not just LED bulbs. It's also it's indoor lighting. It's also outdoor lighting, which is not bulb, which is a direct solution. If you're off-grid, the most efficient way is LED, and off-grid, the only way to generate electricity is solar. So I think there's a very close correlation between solar and LED. So indeed, we're agnostic. We like to sell LEDs, but we also realize that for the market to grow further, it needs to expand, and the expansion in the developing world is something that we look forward.
And Kathy, John was saying in Africa is one of your big markets, right?
In India, yeah.
In India, that looking out, I think Alan asked 20 years out, he still saw a big role for the grid as well as distributed. How do you think about that?
Well, again, we're agnostic on it. So, obviously, my sister parts of SunEdison are building big renewable power stations that are connected to the grid. We build mini grids in places where the grid hasn't come to yet, but we're quite happy if the grid ends up getting extended to those places, as long as our investment doesn't get stranded. So we do need some public policy sort of protection to make sure that the investment still works. But at the same time, again, we're seeing this in the United States as well, and in Europe, at the end of feeder lines, the grid often gets wobbly. Yep. So when you have distributed power stations at the end of those feeder lines, it's helpful. So we have a project, for example, in Karnataka in India right now, where it's a very agricultural place. The farmers either have unreliable electricity from the grid because it's so weak, or they're using diesel for water pumping. So we go in, we provide solar-powered water pumps so that they can grow crops more easily, more economically. We oversize those a little bit so that there's a little bit of extra power to feed back into the grid, and then it makes the whole grid stronger. So in that case, we have two sets of customers. The customers are both the farmers and the local distribution company.
Good. Let me see if we got questions. Any questions out here from the audience? Yep, in the back.
Tim Woodward with Prelude Ventures. Kathy, what's the default rate and what's the collection mechanism for, or is there enough experience to know what the default rate is?
It's early days, right?
Yeah, it's the default rate and the collection mechanism. Again, it varies by country. So I'll do collection first. In India, it's prepay. People sign up to a monthly scheme, and then they pay ahead of time. And it's still too early to know what the coming in and out is. I mean, again, we've got 60 mini grids with these anchor tenants that are cell phone towers going right now, and we've only been doing it for a few months. So we don't quite know yet. In Africa, mobile money is everywhere. So it's the same sort of prepayment scheme, but the payment is much easier. In India, it literally is a guy who walks around and collects the money ahead of time, and he collects the money and then wires it to a bank account. In Africa, the villagers themselves are using mobile money. So what we're doing right now is collecting data, and again, the idea is that we are looking at patterns, overlaying it. We do a fair amount of market research ahead of time on the backgrounds of the different villagers. In Africa, we've spent months interviewing people to see what product they think they would like. And then the question is, just like when people are asked questions here, oh, would you sign up for a green power product? And it's like, yeah, and then until you have to, and then you don't. So what we're watching, in these early months to see what happens. I mean, my aim is for the next sort of 12 to 18 months to focus on several key markets that are really promising and learn a lot and hone the model and then take it elsewhere.
Anything surprised you in the early days? Any uses that you weren't looking for?
Well, not so far. I mean, no, not no. As I say, I don't. There's like I say, there's a. Well, no. I guess what's sort of surprising, weirdly, is that consumers are consumers, everywhere. So you know, people have an appetite for something, but then they don't. It's the same thing that is true here. There's a diversity of people that are in the villages. Some people in the villages are saying, I don't care about lighting, but I really would like a TV. Forget the lighting, I just want the television. So we're looking at, you know, is there a really low-cost tablet that we could help provide, that we want to get, we could get a local entrepreneur to start providing electronics, low-cost tablets. So I guess the surprising thing, and I shouldn't be surprised, is that consumers the world over are consumers.
Consumers, yeah, that's the thing about them. Somebody have a question back there? No? No. Pierre-Yves, so one more question, I'm going to give you guys a follow-up. So in your business, what are the big exciting, what's the most exciting two opportunities? I mean, the whole world's going LED, but what are you really?
So in LED, we serve 4 markets. So we talked about the lighting market. We serve the cell phone market. So if you have an Apple phone, you know, when you turn that little LED in the back, that's us. You know, when you're looking for your room key or whatever in the evening. So cell phone market is very exciting, but I can't talk too much about it because we have a certain customer that does allow us to talk about it.
Can't imagine who that is, yeah.
Yeah, and the other market that we serve is television, but it's quite saturated. And then the last market, which is the most exciting for me, is the automotive market, you know. So cars are moving to headlights, LED headlights, you know, 34 different functions with LED in a car, front, back, turn signals, you know, fog lights, chimsel in the back. So very significant growth in automotive and a lot of new technologies, you know, and you see that in the i8. They had a combination of LED and laser in the headlamps. So quite exciting for us.
So let me ask one last question then. We talked, the point of this panel, as I said earlier, was how are we going to electrify the 3.5 billion? So taking Alan Murray's sort of 20-year framework, how much progress can we make in 20 years? Are we going to have everybody either on the grid or on one of your mini grids? Or are we going to have half of them? Or what does it look like to you?
Look, I think the progress can happen really, really quickly because the economics now work. Number one. Number two, the biggest thing that's happened in the last 15 years is and I worked at the United Nations in 1984 when the same sort of terrible statistics about access to electricity. The thing that's changed is that now everybody in the world has a cell phone that needs to be charged. So they really need electricity, right? So that happened in a very short amount of time. So I think cell phone is driving electricity, not electricity allowing cell phones. So I think that happened really quickly and that we now have cost-effective technology and that I can build a mini grid in a couple weeks. Like, but by 2025, we could, if there's access to capital and good supportive policies, we could have this problem licked.
You agree? You optimist? We're going to get it done?
I think it's going to depend on governments. You know, I think if governments keep spending on weapons in certain countries in Africa, rather than bettering the life of their citizens, it's not going to happen. So I'm an optimist and a pessimist. I think the technology is there, but the will has to be there. And if it's not there, it's not going to happen, you know. It requires investments up front, and if nobody's putting the money, it's not going to happen, you know.
Okay, well, that's a optimistic and yet sober note to end on. Thank you guys very much. Please join me in thanking us.